If you've noticed, the groups described in these video lectures on the American responses to the British invasion have sort of been unofficially divided into groups that were successful before, during, and after the British invasion, and then artists who emerged as the few examples of successful American artists during the British invasion. Bob Dylan emerged as being successful during the British invasion, as did the Byrds and Sonny and Cher, whereas Phil Spector and the Beach Boys, they were successful before, during, and after. So now that we're talking about music on the East Coast, we will first discuss another one of those groups that was successful before, during, and after the Beatles, and that is the Four Seasons. Later known as Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, Frankie Valli is their lead singer, the Four Seasons were a white vocal group, although a lot of them played their own instruments. One of the things that really makes this group stand out is that they wrote all of their own music. The first three of the main members of the Four Seasons were Frankie Valli, Tommy DeVito, and Nick Massey. All three of them grew up in New Jersey. They were born in the 1940s, grew up in the 1950s. They lived in a predominantly Italian-American neighborhood that was really known for its mob and gangster mentality, sort of this approach that the only way out of this neighborhood was to join the army, go to jail, or have a hit record. I only listed three members of the Four Seasons because they started with a fourth member, but he quickly left the group because he was put in jail. However, a friend of the band by the name of Joe Pesci, yes, that Joe Pesci, knows this other guy that he thinks would be a great fit for the band. His name is Bob Gaudio. Now, Bob Gaudio is only 15, but he's already had a hit record with a song called Who Wears Short Shorts. Joe Pesci thinks Bob Gaudio would be a great fit for the band. They're all about the same age. He's a great singer, but because he's had a hit record, we know he's also a great songwriter. So after a gig, Joe Pesci introduces everyone. Bob Gaudio is brought into the band with no formal contract, just a handshake agreement, and that handshake agreement is still honored today by the band nearly 60 years later. There are a few problems in the early days of the Four Seasons. Many of the members served jail time at different points, but they finally start to have some significant success when they're signed to a record contract by a man by the name of Bob Crewe. His agreement with them is that he will record their music when they write a song that's good enough, in his opinion, but until they do, they have to sing backup vocals for other artists that he works with. So there are some early recordings from the 1960s of the Four Seasons as background singers for other artists' music. Then finally, Bob Gaudio writes a song that the Four Seasons think is going to be great, thinks it's going to be their hit. They get on the telephone, they call the producer Bob Crewe, and on the phone, they sing this four-part harmony rendition of this song, Sherry. Bob Crewe thinks it's going to be a big hit, says get in here right away. They record Sherry in 1962, big hit. Record Big Girls Don't Cry, 1962, big hit. Record Walk Like a Man, 1962, big hit. Record Let's Hang On, 1965, big hit. Record Working My Way Back to You, 1966, big hit. And that's just a sampling. The Four Seasons are going to go on to have tremendous success throughout the 1960s and even into the 1970s. However, there's a problem. One of the members, Tommy DeVito, in order to finance the success of this group in the early days, he takes out a personal loan from the mafia for $500,000. That's the equivalent of $4.1 million in 2020. So he takes out this huge loan without telling the other members, and he's unable to pay it back. So eventually the mafia comes and knocks on their doors, and they said, where's our money? This is a group of people that have killed for that amount of money. So what they decide, for what Frankie Valli, the group's leader, decides is that we are all collectively, the four of us, going to pay back his loan. We're going to continue touring until that $500,000 is paid off. And again, that's like paying back $4 million today. Frankie Valli's known for his iconic falsetto. It's really, really high singing that he does. And that comes to be known as East Coast falsetto, compared to West Coast falsetto, which would be the really high singing of the Beach Boys. Listen to a Beach Boys album and then listen to a Four Seasons album. Very different sound, even though both feature a lead singer singing incredibly high notes. Tommy DeVito, this band member who, without telling anyone else, took out a $500,000 loan, is a real pain to work with and be around. So eventually he gets kicked out of the group, even though the rest of the Four Seasons agree that they're going to still work to pay off his debt, because that's what you do. You take care of your family. You take care of the people that you belong to. Nick Massey, one of the other singers, decides that he's overwhelmed with everything. He wants to quit. He wants to go home. He wants to raise a family. He wants to get married. So by this point, we only have two original members, Frankie Valli, the lead singer, and Bob Gaudio, the primary songwriter. What they decide to do, again, extending this handshake contract, is that Bob Gaudio, just like the Beatles and just like Brian Wilson, who decide that they're going to step aside and only focus on writing and recording music, Bob Gaudio decides he's going to stay home. Frankie Valli is going to hire four new singers. So now it's Frankie Valli plus 4. So before there were a total of 4, now there's a total of 5. Frankie Valli is the lead singer, and he has 4 backup singers that are just hired people, sort of like the Wrecking Crew, right? These are nameless musicians, maybe hire different people every tour. So that's how they go on tour. Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, with music, new original music being written by Bob Gaudio. So that's why you have that name change in the middle of their career. Another group who, just like many of the folk artists we talked about in the previous lecture, originates in Greenwich Village, but unlike them, this group stays in New York and Greenwich Village, is called the Lovin' Spoonful. And unlike other groups that play sort of a combination of folk and rock, like the Byrds and Bob Dylan, the Lovin' Spoonful plays more of a combination of folk and pop music, folk and mainstream. So they're led by John Sebastian. He's the leader of the group, and he plays an instrument called the auto harp. The auto harp is a small instrument, maybe this big or so. You hold it and you push keys, and what these keys do is they mute certain strings by putting a little piece of felt on it. And if you want to play a G chord, it's not like on a guitar or piano where you need to know the fingering to play a certain chord. On this auto harp, you just literally push the button with the letter G, and that moves certain mutes so that if you strum the whole thing, only the notes that make that chord are able to vibrate freely. So you just push the right button you want for your chord, and it sounds like you're playing this stringed instrument. And that's what he uses. That's what John Sebastian uses. We have 3 big hits in the mid-60s. In 1965, we have Do You Believe in Magic? 1966, we have Daydream. While you're listening to these, remember that these songs are coming out at the same time as Bob Dylan's music is. And then in 1966, we also have Summer in the City. And they're known for this really upbeat, kind of happy image. Another group we have is originally called the Young Rascals, although they later changed their name to just the Rascals. They were called the Young Rascals because if you've seen the show The Little Rascals, they have characters like Alfalfa, and they all have this certain way they dress. They would actually dress like the Little Rascals, but they sort of got sick of that image and dropped the Young. It's sort of similar to a more modern example of like Lil Bow Wow just started going by Bow Wow. They dropped the Young part of their name. Although if you look at their music now on Spotify or iTunes, or if you just search for it on YouTube, you might see either name. So if you're looking for one of their songs and you see the Young Rascals versus the Rascals, just know it's the same group. Just depends on when did they record that song. Remember 1965 when the Beatles played Shea Stadium, the first ever big rock band stadium performance. The Rascals actually opened for the Beatles at that performance. They were the warm-up act that played before the Beatles went on. They're known for their 2 hit songs, Good Lovin' from 1965 and Groovin' from 1966. And the final band, the final East Coast band we'll highlight is called the McCoys, led by Rick Derringer. And all of the members of the band, all of them were under the age of 18 when their first hit song, Hang On Sloopy, comes out. Now, if you think back to that song Louie Louie, which was controversial because the FBI investigated them, they thought they were using swear words in the song. Hang On Sloopy is really, really similar to Louie Louie intentionally because Louie Louie was a big hit, so they decide, hey, let's write something that sounds like that, and it was successful. But because they're under 18, the record producer comes up to them and says, wow, guys, this song Hang On Sloopy is a huge hit. We need to get you on the road. We need to get you touring to promote this music. And all their parents say, not till spring break. So they're all seniors. They have to wait till spring break. They do a week or 2 of touring. They go back to school, finish the school year, and then once the summer hits, then they kick it into high gear and they go on tour. This next part is just a fun fact, so you don't have to worry about remembering this for a test or anything. But the man who produced the McCoys, his name was Bert Burns, and he actually worked with quite a few different famous people. We talked about the Drifters, famous for Under the Boardwalk. They were produced by Leiber and Stoller, but when Leiber and Stoller stepped down as their producer, Bert Burns took over. At this point, he's recording the McCoys, and he's going to go on to produce Neil Diamond and the Monkees. This concludes the summary of East Coast American responses to the British invasion, but everyone we talked about so far has been a big hit, and that's sort of the nature of this class, right? We only have time to talk about the most important bands, the most important songs, things like that. But something else happens during the British invasion, a very important reaction that has nothing to do with famous musicians. We're going to talk about that in the next video lecture.